Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today, I'm back with Rosanne Moore, and we are continuing our deeper dive on the conversation that I had with Anna LeBaron about her experience in a violent polygamist cult where her father was actually a big source of the violence. I would encourage you to go back to the previous episodes. The last three episodes actually have been leading up to this final one in this little series that we've done. And so I'd encourage you to go back and check those episodes out. The first one with Anna LeBaron and Ruth Warner, then Anna's interview, and then our first half of this discussion about Anna's interview, this deeper dive that we're doing. So do that before you listen to anything else. All right. Okay. Spiritual bypass. So Anna brought this up when talking about her healing journey. She explained how even after escaping the cult, she used religious language and practices to suppress her emotional pain instead of working through it. And she said, for a long time, I was spiritually bypassing. I was using faith to avoid facing the pain and trauma, using faith to do that. Okay, so spiritual bypass is a psychological term describing when someone uses spiritual beliefs or practices to avoid dealing with difficult emotions, trauma, and unresolved issues. Instead of confronting pain, a person might rely on mantras, prayer, or religious platitudes to just move on prematurely. In Anna's case, she recognized that her early coping mechanisms were rooted in this kind of bypass.
Yeah. And in all fairness to Anna, okay, so we talked about how cult members jump through mental hoops to justify what their leadership. One form of that is spiritual bypassing. So she had been trained in that since childhood by the adults around her. So it's not surprising that this came off in layers. But it is a super common one, I think. Anytime you see a religious group where people are not honest, they don't feel the freedom to be honest about where they are with God. They are trying to adhere to a code of behavior instead of being able to be honest about what's happening or the questions that they have, what they're wrestling with. Again, back to the Psalms, like the psalmist is honest. I think that's part of the reason I am a Christian, is something that I read in author Philip Yancey's book, Why the Question That Never Goes Away. He said that in the Psalms, God gives us the language of protest, that there are things about the world that are not as they should be. And God actually gives us the language for crying out against that in the Psalms and in the prophets. And so anytime you have somebody who feels that pleasing God means shutting down what's really going on inside and just trying to behave, you're going to have spiritual bypassing. I see that happen a lot with worship music now, where people get an emotional boost so that they don't have to feel what they're actually feeling. And one of the things that I've been looking at is the whole biblical concept of lament, the ability to enter grief or suffering or questioning or doubt and to be really, really honest.
Yeah, I think we've talked about already. That was one of the things that I wanted was to be strong, and so the idea of lament or crying about something felt wrong or like against my sense of identity. And and I remember there was a time, and I wrote about this in my book, where I had a breakup, and I went and told my mom, and she was like, "Why aren't you crying?" And I was like, "I'm fine. I'm fine." And then I went back, and I went on with life and just refused to cry about it for nearly 5 years. 5. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But that just tells you how much I identified as I needed to be strong. This is not going to faze me. I'm not that girl. And that sort of thing. And then finally, I was like, oh my gosh, this is still kind of haunting me. And then I let myself kind of soak in it, cry, lament, whatever. One night is all it took. was like, better.
Yeah.
And that helped me open up again emotionally as a human. I think I'd
Yes.
closed down that
Yes.
humanity. I
Right.
was saying, I think that's what I did a lot of. And this is one of the reasons why I care about it so much, is because I've experienced it, where I shut down those pieces of me that were human. I don't know if
And
that's
if
the
you
right way to
can't
put it,
grieve
but
your grief, you can't fully experience your joy. Like
that's right.
both ends of the spectrum are connected. So, yeah,
That's right. And
yeah.
it made it so that I was afraid of getting into any kind of relationship again.
Hmm.
And so that
Hmm.
helped open that back up again for me.
Yeah.
But I just say that because I feel like I want to make it real for people, so it's not just the big huge traumas that we're talking about. It's also the little things, and like a breakup, which is not just a little thing when you're going through it. But I think we can all relate to that.
A really common form of like spiritual bypassing is around forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Pushing people to forgive immediately, or saying that we're going to forgive when we haven't actually acknowledged the level of pain or loss that we feel, the level of injury. You can't actually forgive somebody if you have not grappled with the injury that was caused.
That's right.
And so that was one thing that came to mind as a really common form of spiritual bypassing. And we see a lot of memes on social media, I think, fall into this category where there are these very pithy, simplistic statements that are made that I'm like, yeah, life is not like that. Just, yeah, it's just, life is a lot more complicated than that, you
Yes.
know?
Yes, it's
So,
true. And that forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean restoration. It doesn't mean that you have
exactly.
to go back to the relationship as it was.
Right.
You can forgive somebody and still cut them out of your life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if they're an unsafe person, you should
Exactly.
for your own well-being.
Okay. She talked about healing in layers. So Anna used this metaphor while describing her decades long healing process. She wanted listeners to understand that healing from deep trauma, especially spiritual abuse, is not linear or quick, but cyclical and layered. She said, healing doesn't happen all at once. It comes in layers like peeling an onion. You think you've dealt with something, and then another layer shows up. So, healing in layers is a metaphor often used in trauma recovery to describe how emotional healing happens gradually over time. Survivors often revisit the same pain points with new awareness and capacity as they grow. In Anna's story, this metaphor helps normalize the reality that healing can take years and may involve revisiting painful memories multiple times before that resolution truly settles in.
One of the things that I think that this reminds us of is the fact that, like, harm matters. You know, that we want to rush people through recovery. But trauma resides in the body, like long after, and lots of studies have shown this. You know, it rewires the brain, it rewires your biochemistry. And so demanding that somebody just be better so that you cannot have to deal with their trauma anymore is not realistic. It's not fair to them. And for the person who's hard on themselves, our culture rewards strength. Most of us really want to be strong. We don't want to be needy. We struggle with our vulnerability, and we've all seen people who weaponized things that happened to them so that they and used it as an excuse to constantly demand from others. So I think that can also be a barrier sometimes, where we don't want to be that person, and so then we just shove it in a little box and we try to be okay faster than we are. But I think part of the reason it comes off in layers is it takes time to realize what you've lost. I
Mm.
mean, she lost her whole child. Like, children should come into the world and be loved and cared for and nurtured, and that should be their early life experience. And nobody gets that perfectly, but like, she didn't get that at all, like, at all. And so I think, for somebody who's been through an experience like that, part of the layers are being a parent yourself and realizing what you're giving to your child you never received. And then becoming a grandparent and realizing that even though you did better with your own kids, there were still ways that you had not healed enough to be able to give everything you want to give. I think I've heard that from a lot of trauma victims. And I don't have grandkids yet, but I certainly see with my own children how I did some things much better than had been my experience. And yet I've got enough distance now, and they're young adults, and we've had conversations that I still miss the boat on some things that really mattered. And so we're in the process of, still trying to do repair on that. Healing takes time and grieving takes time. And it does come in layers. I mean, grief is like that anyway, right? It's like it comes in waves. I had a close friend in high school that was killed in a plane crash in her 20s. So, it's been 30 years, but I still think of her sometimes. And all of a sudden, the missing her is very fresh. So, yeah, that's
Yeah.
part of love, right?
Yeah. I can just point to a quick story of, my book is called Unfrozen, Stop Holding Back and Release the Real You. And I remember having a conversation with somebody once about how I was feeling like I was holding back. And she was like, I thought you were unfrozen.
Oh, that it would be so easy.
I was like, well, I mean, yes, initially, yes. And
Yes,
yet this is not something that's just gone.
right.
I mean, that's a nice idea that all of a sudden that I wouldn't ever feel the same, consistent struggle I've had my entire life. But I think that's my point is just the same. It is layers.
Even though it comes up again, you're not in the same place. Even though you're frozen, you're not frozen like you were before.
Right.
Yeah.
And
So
you're learning how to step into that in different ways. So it's like maybe it opened up this for you, but this over here, it hasn't opened up yet until you step into it. And
right.
you have to practice and be that person as that transformed person in new arenas, in new areas of your life, and see how it plays out. So anyway, okay. The book Educated by Tara Westover. Anna mentioned Educated while discussing how other memoirs have helped her feel seen and validated. She connected deeply with the book's themes of growing up in an isolated, controlling environment and breaking free through self-discovery and education. Anna said, when I read Educated, I wept. It was the first time I saw parts of my own story reflected in someone else. Educated is a best-selling memoir by Tara Westover, published in 2018. It tells the story of a woman raised by survivalist parents in rural Idaho with no formal education, who eventually escapes the control of her family and earns a PhD from Cambridge. The book explores themes of indoctrination, identity, family loyalty, and the struggle to define yourself apart from your upbringing. For Anna, reading Educated affirmed that others had experienced similar psychological and emotional battles.
And I think what is really key is the role that education, again, we're back to echo chambers, control of information in any kind of cult setting, whether it is state TV in Russia that only allows people in Russia to hear one version of the world, whether it is in a and I homeschooled my kids. So I'm not, and when I say this about her situation, Tara's situation, I am not anti-homeschool. I want to make that very clear. But when you see a homeschool environment that completely isolates the children from the rest of society, that should be a huge red flag. What's happening is not education, it is indoctrination, and it is dangerous. Something really unhealthy is happening there. When you see that, like, again, if you're in a church situation and you have a pastor who does not allow you to read anything other than certain prescribed authors or his own books, or, you're not allowed to read anything outside that. Information control, information exposure or lack of exposure is a powerful tool of coercive control. I live in the South, and that was a big part of Jim Crow and years post Civil War. During the slavery years, like enslaved people were not allowed to read. You were not allowed to teach enslaved people to read because you didn't want them getting any ideas. You wanted to control information, and you wanted to control their ability to be able to take care of themselves outside of the system of slavery. So information control is a huge part of coercive control.
I'm thinking about some different situations or people that have spoken about concerns regarding information control or not wanting their kids to hear certain things or go to certain colleges or take certain classes because of the information that they might be hearing, and they might become less like their parents, basically. But their parents might say they are straying from their faith, or I don't know, there might be different, they're being indoctrinated opposite, in the opposite direction. And I think it's an interesting situation because yes, I do think that there's potential for that. There's potential for, okay, so you go to some other place and get new information, and then you reject everything you ever knew. It's almost like another cult. So while at the same time, if you're learning something that's a little outside of the norm, a little outside of what you've known before, or introducing new ideas and making you grapple with them, maybe that's important. Maybe we need to be doing that. What are your thoughts?
First of all, I go back again to truth can be interrogated. If somebody jettisons everything they've been taught their whole life, then it was never theirs to begin with. So although on the one hand, you can say, oh, but they're going into a new cult, but it was never theirs to begin with.
But what if they are getting into a new cult?
But again, they're making a choice. It's very hard. It's like watching somebody go back to an abusive relationship. They're making a destructive choice.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, yes, but you also cannot take someone's agency. And so in a situation like that, if you see somebody drawn into a cult, and I'm really bad at this. I know that this is true, but I'm really bad at this. The best way to handle that is not to confront it head on, what's wrong. The best way to handle it is to get them to tell you about what they're doing and see if there's any point where they're questioning and underscore their sense that something is off. You want to build agency. You don't want to take agency. And that's true when you're dealing with somebody in a coercive control domestic situation. You cannot try to force them to leave. I had a conversation with somebody at one point that was, she was making all these all these airy-fairy bypassing statements, and I'm grinding my teeth and letting her finish. And then at the end of what she said, she made one statement that showed, okay, she knows things are not well. And I asked about that. I asked about that statement. And then what she came out with was, yeah, this was really wrong. And I said, you're right, that was really wrong. And I couldn't touch all of the other stuff because she would have doubled down, but I could speak to the truth of what she was seeing was wrong. And I get it. Parents, we've brought our kids up the best we know how to believe certain things. and all of my kids are currently between the ages of 24 and 17, and they are exposed to new ideas and bringing home new things. And I'm learning from them. There are some things I'm learning from them, and I appreciate that. There are other things. We had a very vigorous conversation about something the other night that I'm like, what have you been reading? That's nuts. I lived during the Cold War. I saw the fall of the Berlin Wall. What are you talking about? Talking about history about how things had happened or whatever. So I get it, but it's scary when your kid comes home with ideas that you think are really, really wrong. But if you try to take agency away again, you might force them back into the fold, but you will not have actually gotten their belief. You'll just have gotten their acquiescence.
Mm-hmm.
And so I get it why parents are, get scared about that stuff. And I think there are some things that are age appropriate,
Yeah.
some conversations that are age appropriate and that you want to shape. But in this homeschool communities that I've been in, one thing that I've witnessed a lot of is that not everybody who homeschools does this. I've seen a lot of people who are doing it who homeschool for really solid reasons. But some of the people that I've seen homeschool do it because they are trying to take their kids out of exposure to anything they disagree with. Guess what? They're going to grow up, they're going to run into that stuff, and it's going to blow their mind because they're going to find out that not necessarily everything you told them is the only way of looking at things. You might have been right, but it's still not the only way of looking at things. And if they've never had the chance to wrestle with that, with any ideas other than what you've let them be exposed to, it's a lot harder, and they're actually far more likely to blow you off
Mm-hmm.
than
Because now they don't trust you.
Exactly. So, yeah. So I think a big part of that fear, it's driven by fear. And I don't think fear is a good driver for any system of handling things.
I think one of the things to keep in mind is that if you want to have a relationship with the person who is exploring new ideas and you want to have any influence on them in the future, because this is the whole point of this podcast, right? Like, we're trying to have an influence of some kind. But if you're wanting to maintain some kind of influence with somebody who's exploring new ideas, then you want to be the person who they can explore them with.
Right.
Not the person who silences them, shuts them down, uses thought stopping statements, and tries to keep them from saying anything, because now all of a sudden what you've influenced them to do is to pull away. And yes, they might smile and nod when they're with you, but then they're still going to go think about it, and they're still going to go explore it. And now they're going to go explore it with somebody who maybe you don't trust. So especially when it comes to parenting, you want to maintain a relationship where they are comfortable having those kind of conversations. And honestly, I'm not always comfortable having a conversation where my own child disagrees with me on something, because it feels yucky. You want to be in alignment on so many levels, especially me.
Right.
I want that. Right. I want to be in alignment on every possible level. And yet that's just so not reality. And and so I think that especially with our kids and with people that we hold dear, if we want to have that influence, we want to be the person that they can explore it with, not the person they run away from.
Yeah. And I think one of the things too I'm learning as I get older is love is letting another person be who they are. It's like, if I both want to be able to be honest in my relationship with my kids of where I think that they're wrong. I want to be able to talk about why I think something is true and why I think it would benefit them to believe that it is true. I have one child who's going through a a faith journey right now that's very different from where I would prefer that child to be. But we had a really good conversation at one point where he said to me, I don't want to hurt you by saying things that I know you don't believe. And I said, it would hurt me more if you felt like you could not be honest about where you are and what you're thinking than for you to disagree with me. And it ended up being a really beautiful doorway to continued conversations, meaningful conversations. But like if I shut that down by insisting that that other way of seeing it was right, of what I was saying was true, and he needed to believe it because I felt like, oh my goodness, he's going to be at risk if he doesn't. Like if I had gone that direction, it was not going to change where his heart was. It was just going to change my ability to speak into what his journey is. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful in that moment. That was one of those times where I had the wisdom to keep my mouth shut until I'd listened first.
One of those moments.
Yeah. They
yes,
don't always happen, but yes, I'm making progress. It comes in layers.
That's right. Okay, finding your voice. So this came toward the end of the interview when Anna was reflecting on the transformation she experienced from being silenced and afraid to becoming an author, speaker, and advocate. It was a moment of encouragement for listeners who may still be in the early stages of healing. And Anna said, for years, I didn't even know I had a voice. Mm-hmm. Now I use it to help others find theirs. Finding your voice is both a personal metaphor and a cultural phrase that describes reclaiming one's identity, power, and ability to speak after being silenced. In the context of spiritual abuse and high control systems, survivors often lose trust in their own thoughts, feelings, and intuition. Anna's journey of finding her voice, first through healing, then through writing and speaking, is central to her message. It also beautifully echoes what we talk about here on the Voice of Influence podcast.
And one way that I see this happen for women who have come out of abusive relationships is when they're starting to think about dating again, even if they're not ready to actually date, filling out a dating app profile, even if they never launch it, like it never goes live, can be a really good way for them to self-reflect about what they want in their life instead of being shaped by expectations from other people. I've recently been kind of lurking on a Facebook dating group where the person who leads the group helps identify rhetorical patterns that indicate an unhealthy prospective date. I mean, I've been learning about cults and coercive control and domestic violence since really 2009 was when I started. I'm still realizing in reading the things that the kind of the lists of statements that are frequently made by men that are abusive or go on to be abusive or problematic in other ways. Often I would read the profile and there would be a ick factor that I would feel in my gut, but my mind would still go, well, you don't want to be too hard. You don't want to be too judgmental. Maybe they're just not a good writer, all these things. But as I've stayed in this group kind of lurking, just watching these rhetorical patterns get analyzed and then having the person come back and say, okay, so that was the initial post. What should I have seen? Because this is what happened later and it was really gross and awful. It's been beneficial, to reclaiming connecting my voice with my gut, of being willing to trust my intuition, not to just shoot off say whatever I'm thinking off the cuff. You've talked about the love edits idea, but also paying attention to what happens viscerally in me when I realize something's off and I stop and I ponder that instead of shut it down. And then I deliberately choose to find my voice.
So finding your voice, I think so much of that is finding your inner voice and just knowing what you think, knowing what your opinion is, and not basing that off of what other people think and have shared about their opinions, but having your own. And I think it is hard for some people, especially people pleasers. It's really hard to distinguish your own wants and needs and thoughts and opinions from other people's, because you're so attuned to what other people are thinking and feeling, and you want that connection, you want that alignment with that other person so bad that you just, naturally try to align yourself up. And there have been times when I've done that as well, and I think that it's hard because, yes, when you're in a relationship with anybody, any kind of relationship, there's give and take. And so you think, well, I can go with that.
Right.
Whatever kind of relationship it is, I can go with that. But it's a fine line. I don't know if there is a line exactly between, when you should assert your own thoughts and opinions and voice and agency, and when you should kind of let it go. But it does seem like being aware of what you think and making a distinction between what somebody else thinks and what you think is the first step. Shiny Happy People. This was on Amazon Prime in 2023. It is a docuseries. Anna mentioned this series in connection with growing public awareness of spiritual abuse and how mainstream documentaries are helping to expose the truth behind some influential religious movements. She said, when Shiny Happy People came out, it opened up a lot of eyes. People started connecting the dots between public figures and the hidden abuse in these systems. Okay. So that docuseries, Shiny Happy People, a 2023 docuseries on Amazon Prime that explores the Duggar family, the Institute of Basic Life Principles, which is IBLP, and the teachings of Bill Gothard. We're going to talk about Bill Gothard separate from Shiny Happy People, but the series reveals how these teachings promoted extreme patriarchy, authoritarianism, and silence around abuse. It also highlights the systemic control exerted over women and children. Anna referenced this show because it created cultural space for survivors to speak up and for the public to understand the dangers of manipulative religious environments. Did you watch Shiny Happy People, Rosanne?
I did. I was actually in the throes of appendicitis, and I made the unfortunate decision thinking that I'm familiar with this. I had exposure to this as a teenager. It's kind of what set me up for my own cult experience. And I thought, but I've already done my work on this. It won't be a big deal to watch. And I'm not feeling very good. So I'm just going to distract myself and watch this. And then it turned out I had appendicitis, and I'm having all this trauma brought up in the middle of it. It was a bad decision.
Oh my goodness. So here you are in pain, and then you're like in emotional pain as well.
Yeah. And then it's like, I think I need to go to the hospital and go get my appendix out.
Oh, shoot.
It was quite the thing. And then I had to come back later and go through it and process it, really process it in depth.
Okay, so I'll just recap real quick. The Duggars rose to fame in 2008 when they landed their own reality television show, 19 Kids and Counting. The TLC series became an instant hit and gave viewers a peek into their ever-growing family and ultra-conservative Christian household. Okay, so if you have watched 19 and Counting, or if you've heard anything about the Duggars, this is actually, I feel like it's a really important docu-series to watch. I read at least one of the girls from the family wrote, a couple of them wrote memoirs, and I think I've read at least one of those. maybe I've read them both. I don't remember. But just kind of hearing how they got involved, like how the parents kind of initially got involved in this really ultra fundamentalist kind of Christian setting, and how they so wanted to do right by God, and they wanted to promote the faith. They wanted people to learn about their faith and their religion, and they wanted people to convert, and they thought, this is an opportunity for us to be able to do that through this show. But then it kind of morphed into this other.
Yeah, it kind of gets presented that way, but if you dig a little bit further, the whole patriarchal package is about control.
Sure.
So the thing about cults is it starts out with, we're going to get, and this one in particular, and I'm speaking with a great deal of knowledge because of my own background. I would say I never got into the IBLP specifically, but I did attend Gothard events as a teenager. I had a church where there were families that were influenced by this. So I can speak with a significant degree of familiarity to this. The package that's offered is, you want to have a good family. You want to keep your family safe from the evil world out there. We are going to tell you how to do it. And if you do things this way, if you do things God's way, you will also be protected from just random evil events that can happen in the world. Financial trouble. You won't have miscarriages. You won't have, there was pretty much a rule for everything that would protect you.
Wow.
So, yeah.
If you do this, then you get that.
Exactly. And a big part of it, because Jim Bob was like the dad, the Duggar dad, a big part of it is patriarchy. The dad is the umbrella who protects the family. The dad's word is law. The dad is next to God. He speaks for God. I hope you can see the similarities between that and Erpel LeBaron. And that is a part of it. The idea that children are not simply your family that you nurture and that you care for, but you are actually populating the earth to take over and control society. Like, that's an element of it. So yeah, I never got into the show because I knew too much behind the curtain about the stuff to begin with. Yeah.
Exactly. I think it probably looked like, I would imagine,
looked like shiny, happy people.
Right? That's probably what it appeared to be. And yet, behind the scenes, as we find out, it's not so much. And
sexual abuse and cover up, and the sacrifice of children and using the kids.
Yeah.
I think that was the most disturbing part, the way that the kids got used.
Yes.
Repeatedly.
Yep. And Anna brought this up when she started talking about something that she's not talked about before in public. And that is that once she ran away from LeBaron cult, and then she was in a school that was a Christian school. And so while she ran away from one thing, she kind of ran into something else that actually wasn't a healthy Christian school. And it was formed around this idea of IBLP, the Institute in Basic Life Principles, and Bill Gothard, who maybe we should just read about now so we can just keep talking about the whole thing. But basically the point is that she was bringing this up as, I didn't even realize it until later, but it was another controlling, abusive environment, psychologically abusive environment. Okay, so let me read about Gothard, and we can talk a little bit more about it. Anna brought up Gothard while discussing how religious teachings can be used to justify harmful power structures, and suppress individual agency, especially for women and children. She said Bill Gothard's teachings weren't just theology, they were a framework for control. And so many families didn't even realize the damage until much later. So, Bill Gothard is a former leader and founder of the Institute in Basic Life Principles, IBLP, an organization that promoted a strict patriarchal interpretation of Christianity. His teachings emphasized obedience, authority, and purity, often resulting in shame-based control and emotional manipulation. Though once widely followed by conservative Christian families, including the Duggars, Gothard resigned in 2014 after dozens of women accused him of sexual harassment and abuse. Anna referenced him to illustrate how spiritual authority, when unquestioned, can become dangerous. And as I said, to publicly recognize that she was in an additional abusive environment after leaving the cult of her father.
And those women that came forward accusing him of abuse had been young girls that he had persuaded their families to send to him at his headquarters when they were teenagers. Yes.
Under the guise of being
slave labor was what it was. Yes. Yeah.
Yep. So they would be an assistant. They would do things that would help make the organization run.
Yeah. But the organization still goes on, and it has never dealt with the internal structure. That's one thing that needs to be talked about, I think, as we talk about cult dynamics and control dynamics. When you have an organization, when you have the leader leave, it does not change the dynamic of the organization. Those problems in the system still have to be addressed. Because it's not just about the charismatic leader, although they may get it up and running and get things going. There's a whole system behind it that enables that person to have control. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't go away overnight. It has to be systematically addressed from outside.
Yeah, I would imagine that if you're in a system like that and the leader leaves, that there's kind of a vacuum of sorts. And then some of the people that are left are thinking, well, this is how things work. Now I can still enact abuse on others. And that's still the cycle that continues.
And there's culpability. The biggest factor when a leader is removed, there's probably a group of people who is relieved. There's a group of people who are confused. There's a group of people who are angry. Yeah. Not everybody's processing it the same. There's a tendency to circle the wagons and blame the whistleblowers because there's culpability. The organization, to varying degrees, people know that something's not right, but for the sake of the mission, for the sake of personal influence and power or finances or whatever, motivations can be different, but for whatever reason, they have chosen to turn a blind eye to what is right in order to keep things going. And when that leader is removed, they have participated in this now. This is why it is brave, honest people who leave cults, because they're not just victims, they also have been drawn in to be participants to some level in the system. Right. And they have to be willing to face their own culpability in helping make it happen. Mm-hmm. They are both preyed upon, and depending on what their role is, certainly it's different for children than it is for adults who choose to engage. But there's some level at which they have participated in things that they feel guilt over. And whether or not you're willing to face that and own it will have a lot to do with whether or not you are able to leave and whether or not you're able to heal. You mentioned reading the Duggar girls' books, memoirs. I would like to, it'll be interesting to read what they have to say in 20 years. because like Anna, it's going to come off in layers.
Yeah, that will be interesting. Yeah, we actually, episode 327, I just had to look it up. I talked with Tobias Strussen. I don't know if I said that just now correctly. But he wrote a book about healthy culture, and he grew up also in a Christian fundamentalist cult in his home country, which I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. I think Sweden. He talked about that. He talked about how hard it was to admit that he had been culpable as well. And that is so tough. That's rough. And I think that's one of the hard things about all of this is so much of it comes down to our sense of identity and value and worth, being able to recognize that we're not all good, we're not all right, all those things that I was talking about.
Yeah.
And that we have to be able to be self-critical. We have to be able to examine ourselves, examine our belief system, examine our organizational system, our religious system, and take a hard look at things sometimes if we're wanting to maintain a healthy environment, because none of us are without blame. None of us are without fault. So why wouldn't we be honest about where we've been so that we can be better about where we're going, more intentional about where we're going? And I think that's one of the things that I talk about when I'm working with executive leaders. And I'm like, we have to be really honest about where we are right now in order for you to be able to set the course for where you're trying to go. If you are lying to yourself about where you are right now, and then you try to set a course, you're going to be off. It's not going to get you there. And I think that's the case with, and these sorts of situations too.
I think you lose respect and trust of those you want to follow you too if you're not honest, because they know.
Absolutely.
I think it's a reminder that you can't underestimate the ability of people to tell themselves lies. We would like to believe that cults or high control groups are about a bad leader, but bad leaders don't have any power unless they have followers who not just get drawn in initially, but who embrace lies and continue to lie to themselves rather than face the fact that they've been tricked. It's not your fault if you get duped. But the danger is when you're unwilling to admit that, and it becomes almost an investment thing, where you end up, it's like buying a fixer-upper house that money
Sunk
pit
cost.
house. Yeah, the sunk cost. Exactly. Having the integrity, hitting a point where you just have to ask yourself, what kind of person do I want to be? Do I want to look like a good person, like you were saying, to pretend that I'm the perfect person, the good person? Or do I actually want to be a good person, which means acknowledging where I'm not a good person? The only way I can become a better person is if I acknowledge where I failed. And I take ownership.
I feel like this has been a really important conversation. I hope that people are listening. I hope that they share. I feel like there's a lot here that we all need to be aware of. And Rosanne, I want to give us each an opportunity here at the end to offer a challenge. That's what we're doing now at the end of every episode, where I'm offering the opportunity for the guest to offer a challenge to somebody who wants to help shape the future. So based on the conversation that we've just had, I know there are many things that we both mentioned. So I want us each to think of one challenge that we want to offer.
I think curiosity cannot be underemphasized, and the importance of curiosity. If you are dealing with somebody that you think is absolutely wrong, what tends to happen mentally is you hear something, I do this, I so do this. We hear something that we believe is wrong, and we immediately want to rebut it. or we shut down and we assume that we know what they mean by what they started to say. A lot of polarizing conversations that happen are when somebody starts to say something and the other person automatically goes, I know what they mean. And they immediately press against it, want to rebut it. I think whether you're dealing with somebody who's being deliberately manipulative, or whether you're dealing with somebody that just in a regular social setting that you're having a disagreement, the more we can cultivate a curiosity that says, when you say that, when you use this phrase, what does that mean to you? What helped inform your understanding of this, your belief about this? And so if my challenge is anything, it's get curious about where other people are coming from, but also get curious about what has formed your own perception of things, because too often we gather opinions without actually having been as thoughtful about it as we think we are. And so we just know. We just know. My kids have really done something important for me in this. And so I challenge others to do it as well. When you run up against something that you think somebody else is wrong about, don't just ask them where they're coming from, but ask yourself, well, how did I form this opinion? What information did I take in? What biases might I have brought to the table because of my experience, or because of the information sources that I had, or because of my lack of experience? Like, I haven't had everybody's life experience. And so there are other people with other life experiences that I'm coming from my lens, but I could learn something from them. So both ways, I think the curiosity with others, but the self-curiosity as well, to be able to listen better.
It's a good challenge. I think for mine, I'm going to choose, I challenge each person on an issue that you are really adamant about to find one thing that somebody on the other side of that issue, just one thing that helps you understand them better, like why they're experiencing or thinking the thing that they think, and how you can maybe understand it. Okay, I can see how you got there. If you could at least do that, and then also with your own belief on that situation, also think about, what is one thing that I might be wrong about? Is there anything that I'm questioning? And I think just that practice has really caused me to take a step back from my emotional reactions to things like things on the news. So I actively seek out the other opinion. I actively seek out, why would somebody think this, and try to understand it from their perspective, which then helps me to understand them better. I have more of a nuanced understanding of the whole situation. And I think it keeps us from just assuming that we're right about everything, which I think we've established, at least in our conversation, we've certainly established that that's probably not the best way to approach influence. Okay, well, Rosanne, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And I really appreciate you bringing your wisdom and experience and articulated knowledge to this conversation.
I always enjoy talking with you, Andrea. It's always good.